Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. Last spring, after years of saving and dreaming, I finally purchased my first home. It was a charming 3-bedroom in a well-maintained neighborhood with trimmed lawns and friendly faces. What really sold me on the property wasn't the granite countertops or the updated bathrooms, it was the backyard. My yard was unique compared to the others in the subdivision. While most houses had standard rectangular plots, mine was situated at the edge of the development where it backed up to the community green space and playground. The yard was spacious, with mature oak trees providing perfect shade, and it sloped gently down to a small creek that marked the property line. I envisioned peaceful evenings on a deck I'd build, weekend barbecues, and maybe even a small vegetable garden. I knew the house was part of an HOA, and I did my due diligence before signing the papers. The monthly fees seemed reasonable for the amenities provided: pool maintenance, landscaping of common areas, and snow removal from the main streets in winter. The rulebook was thick but not outrageous. No bizarre paint color restrictions, reasonable limits on holiday decorations, and standard maintenance requirements. Nothing I couldn't live with. During my first month, I met several neighbors who welcomed me warmly. An elderly couple brought over homemade cookies. A family with young kids invited me to their son's birthday party, and several people stopped to chat while I worked in the yard. Everyone seemed friendly and normal, and I felt like I'd made a good choice. About 2 months after moving in, I met the HOA president during the spring community cleanup day. Let's just call him the president. He was in his late 50s with the kind of sunburn that comes from golf, not yard work, and he wore a polo shirt with the neighborhood logo embroidered on the chest. When we shook hands, his grip was too firm, like he was making a point. "So you're the new owner," he said, looking past me at my house. "Good to have you. That property's been vacant too long. Bad for neighborhood aesthetics." "Thanks," I replied. "I'm really happy with it, especially the backyard." Something flickered across his face, but he quickly smiled. "Yes, it's a nice location. Very convenient." I didn't think much about that comment until later. Within my first few months, I invested about $3,000 in landscaping, adding flower beds along the side of the house and planting a small garden in the back corner of the yard. I also started plans for a deck and fire pit area. I was careful to submit all the proper forms to the HOA Architectural Committee, which approved my plans with minimal questions. It was during this early landscaping work that I first noticed the problem. People were cutting through my yard, not just occasionally, but regularly. There was a worn dirt path about 2 feet wide that cut diagonally from the northwest corner of my property to the southeast side, creating a shortcut between the main neighborhood entrance and the community playground. At first, I didn't say anything. I was new and didn't want to start trouble. But as summer progressed and my garden began producing its first vegetables, I noticed trampled plants and damaged seedlings. One morning, I found 3 tomato plants completely crushed, like someone had stumbled through in the dark. On a Saturday in July, I was outside early, setting up a sprinkler, when a group of about 5 adults with kids in tow cut across my lawn. They walked confidently, chatting among themselves, not even acknowledging me standing there in my own yard. Leading the pack was the HOA president, pointing out features of the neighborhood to someone who appeared to be a prospective homebuyer. "Excuse me," I called out politely. "I'd appreciate if you wouldn't cut through my yard. I've just planted this area, and people walking through is damaging my garden." The president stopped and turned slowly, his smile fixed in place but not reaching his eyes. The others looked uncomfortable. "This has always been the neighborhood cut-through," he said dismissively. "It's been this way since the development was built. Everybody uses it. I understand that, but it's my property, and my plants are getting damaged." He chuckled and addressed the group. "New homeowners. Always so territorial at first. Then to me, there's an easement here. It's in your deed. Check your paperwork." With that, he continued leading the group through my yard. That evening, I pulled out all my closing documents and read every single line. There was no easement mentioned anywhere on my property. I even called my real estate agent, who confirmed there were no easements registered with the property other than the standard utility access along the very front edge near the street. The next day, I put up a small decorative sign near the worn path that read, "Please respect private property. Garden in progress." It was tasteful and polite. 3 days later, the sign was gone. The following weekend, I discovered dog waste near my vegetable garden and a broken trellis I'd set up for my cucumber plants. This wasn't just inconsiderate, it was becoming destructive. I decided to address the issue formally and attended the next HOA meeting, which was held in the community center. About 20 homeowners were present, seated in folding chairs as the board members sat at a table at the front. I signed up for the open comments period and waited my turn. When called upon, I stood and explained the situation calmly. "I've noticed a lot of foot traffic through my backyard, which has resulted in damage to my garden and landscaping. I've checked my deed, and there is no easement for a path through my property. I'm simply asking that the HOA inform residents that this is private property and not a public walkway." Before I even finished, the president was shaking his head. When I sat down, he cleared his throat. "We appreciate your concerns, but that pathway has been used by residents for over 15 years. It's an understood community access point to the playground and has always been treated as such by previous owners. But it's not in writing anywhere," I pointed out, "and it's my private property. You're being rather selfish, don't you think?" He responded, "That pathway saves families with young children a significant walk around the block. Are you really going to be the one homeowner who refuses to be a good neighbor?" Several other board members nodded in agreement. No one had even asked to see my deed or property documents. As I left the meeting, a woman touched my arm. She was probably in her 60s, with short gray hair and kind eyes. "Just so you know," she whispered, "the president lives in the house that faces the playground. His grandkids visit every weekend. That path shaves about 7 minutes off his walk with them. That's why he's being so stubborn." The following week, I received an official-looking notice stating that impeding established neighborhood access routes was against HOA policy and could result in fines of $100 per day. The letter cited Bylaw 7.3, which upon checking, was about maintaining clear access to utility boxes, nothing to do with cutting through private property. I'd had enough and contacted a real estate attorney. The consultation cost me $300, but it was worth every penny. The attorney reviewed my documents and confirmed what I already knew. I had every legal right to control access to my property. No easement existed, and the HOA had no authority to create one without my consent and proper legal documentation. "What they're doing is trespassing, plain and simple," the attorney said. "And that letter they sent has no legal standing. I'd recommend documenting everything from now on." Taking his advice, I installed security cameras covering my backyard. Within days, I had dozens of videos of people cutting through, including the president himself, who seemed to make a point of using the path multiple times a day, often with an entourage. The most concerning footage came 3 weeks later. The president entered my backyard carrying measuring tape and wooden stakes. He spent about 20 minutes measuring distances, placing stakes, and taking photos on his phone. He was clearly planning something on my property without my knowledge or permission. Through another neighbor, I learned that the president had been telling people he was working on securing an official easement for the path. He'd apparently even mentioned it at a social gathering, claiming it would be resolved one way or another before the fall festival, which was held in the community green space. I spent a full weekend poring over the HOA bylaws, looking for a solution that would protect my property rights while staying within the rules. The document was 87 pages long, full of legal jargon and specific restrictions. No sheds over certain dimensions. No fences over 4 feet in height in backyards. No unsightly vegetable gardens visible from the street. The list went on. But I found my answer in section 12.8. Landscape barriers of natural materials, stone, wood, or living plants, may be installed with approval from the Architectural Committee, provided they enhance the aesthetic appeal of the property and neighborhood. I drew up detailed plans for a landscape enhancement project. My design included a series of large decorative boulders spaced among native flowering shrubs, creating a natural-looking border that would completely block the worn pathway. The arrangement would be aesthetically pleasing while making it impossible to cut through my yard. The plants I selected were all on the HOA pre-approved list, and the design maintained the required setbacks from property lines. To ensure I was fully covered, I also applied for the proper permits from the county, since the boulders would require heavy equipment for installation. I submitted my plans to the Architectural Committee with detailed drawings, plant selections, and a timeline for installation. 2 weeks passed with no response, which according to the bylaws meant automatic approval if the committee failed to deny a request within 14 days. I had my approval by default, and I had it in writing. I scheduled the installation for a Tuesday when I knew the president would be at work. The boulder delivery and placement took most of the day, with a small crane carefully positioning each 500-pound stone. Between the boulders, I planted dense, thorny barberry bushes and native roses that would fill in over time, creating a beautiful but impenetrable barrier. The entire project cost me nearly $5,000, but watching the final boulder slide into place gave me an immense feeling of satisfaction. As a finishing touch, I added a small, tasteful sign that read "Wildlife Habitat Restoration Area, please do not disturb." This was actually legitimate, as the native plants I'd selected were specifically chosen to support local birds and pollinators. The sign complied with HOA rules regarding environmental education displays. I didn't have to wait long for the reaction. At 5:47 p.m., my security cameras captured the president approaching along the usual path, pushing a stroller with what appeared to be his grandchild. When he encountered the boulder barrier, he stopped abruptly. He walked the length of it, his face growing increasingly red. Then he pulled out his phone and appeared to make a call, gesturing wildly at my landscape enhancement. 10 minutes later, he was pounding on my front door. When I answered, he didn't even bother with a greeting. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice loud enough that several neighbors turned to look. "I've installed a landscape enhancement project," I replied calmly. "It was approved by the architectural committee." "Like hell it was. Remove those rocks immediately or you'll be facing fines and legal action." "I have the approval right here," I said, holding up the paperwork. "Submitted on the 5th, no response within 14 days, which constitutes automatic approval per bylaw 8.2. I also have county permits for the installation." He snatched the papers from my hand, skimmed them, then thrust them back at me. "This is obstructionist. You're blocking an established community pathway." "There is no established pathway on record," I corrected him. "I've checked my deed, property survey, and all HOA documentation. My backyard is private property, not a public thoroughfare." "We'll see about that," he growled, turning to leave. This isn't over. Over the next week, my cameras recorded 3 separate incidents. In the first, the president attempted to move one of the smaller boulders but gave up after nearly throwing out his back. In the second, he sprayed something on several of the newly planted bushes, which I later identified as weed killer. Fortunately, I was able to rinse most of it off before it did serious damage. In the third incident, he actually tried to coach 2 teenage boys on how they might climb over the barrier. All of this was captured in high definition, with clear audio. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following Monday evening. The notice cited urgent landscape violations requiring immediate board attention. I arrived early, accompanied by my real estate attorney, who had agreed to attend for a reduced fee after seeing the footage of the president attempting to damage my plants. The community center was packed. Word had spread about the blocked pathway, and it seemed everyone had an opinion. The president gavelled the meeting to order, his face set in stern lines. "We're here to address a serious violation of community standards," he began. "A homeowner has willfully blocked a long-standing community access point, showing blatant disregard for neighborhood traditions and convenience." My attorney raised his hand. "Before we proceed, I'd like to clarify some legal facts for everyone present." The president tried to deny him the floor, but several homeowners called out that they wanted to hear what he had to say. Reluctantly, the president nodded. My attorney stood. "The pathway in question crosses private property for which no easement exists in any legal record. The homeowner has complete authority to control access to their property. Furthermore, the landscape enhancements were properly submitted to the architectural committee and received automatic approval under your own bylaws. Any attempt to force removal or apply fines would constitute an actionable legal overreach by the HOA." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The president banged his gavel again. "Regardless of technicalities, this is about being a good neighbor. The previous owner allowed access for 15 years. Actually," I said, standing up, "I've spoken with the previous owner. She told me she repeatedly asked people not to cut through a yard but eventually gave up when the HOA under your leadership refused to support her property rights." This caused more whispers. I continued, "I also have something everyone should see." I connected my laptop to the projector and played a compilation of the security footage, showing the president measuring my yard without permission, attempting to move the boulder, spraying weed killer on my plants, and encouraging teens to climb over the barrier. The room went silent as the video played. When it finished, I spoke again. "This is documented vandalism and trespassing by the HOA president, captured after I legally blocked access across my private property." An older gentleman in the back stood up. "Is this true? You tried to kill his plants?" The president's face had gone from red to white. "I was merely investigating an improper installation. As president, I have authority to." "You don't have authority to trespass or vandalize property," my attorney interjected. "Those actions could result in criminal charges, not just civil liability for both you personally and potentially the HOA and other board member." A woman who had always supported the president looked uncomfortable. "I think we need to take a step back here. If the landscaping was approved under our process and there's no legal easement." "There is no easement," I said firmly. "I've provided copies of my deed and property survey to the board secretary. You can verify this independently. What's happened here is that everyone got used to cutting through a private yard, and when I objected, instead of respecting my property rights, I was bullied and my property was vandalized." The meeting devolved into multiple conversations until another board member called for a special vote. Despite the president's objections, the motion carried, and the board voted 4-1 to recognize my property rights and the legitimacy of my landscape enhancement project. They also voted to issue a notice to all homeowners clarifying that the pathway was never an official access point and should not be used. But the real shock came when the treasurer, a quiet man who rarely spoke at meetings, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "In light of tonight's revelations, I feel compelled to share some concerning financial information." He distributed copies of a spreadsheet to the board members. "While reviewing our accounts for the quarterly report, I discovered several unexplained withdrawals authorized solely by the president. These funds, totaling over $12,000, were supposedly for special landscape maintenance but were paid to a company that, upon investigation, appears to be registered to the president's brother-in-law. There are no records of any work performed. The room erupted. Homeowners were standing, shouting questions. The president attempted to grab the financial documents but was blocked by several board members. Within 20 minutes, a motion was introduced and passed to temporarily remove the president from his position pending a full audit and investigation. As the meeting broke up, several neighbors approached me, not to complain about the blocked path but to apologize for the situation. Many admitted they hadn't known they were crossing private property, having been told by the president that it was an official neighborhood path. Over the next few weeks, a sense of normalcy returned. The interim HOA president, the older woman who had tipped me off about the president's grandkids, turned out to be fair and straightforward. The audit revealed additional financial improprieties, resulting in the permanent removal of the former president from the board and legal action to recover misappropriated funds. As for my yard, the barrier became something of a neighborhood attraction. The native plants thrived, attracting butterflies and hummingbirds. Several homeowners even asked for copies of my plant list for their own gardens. That fall, as the leaves changed color, I hosted a backyard barbecue and invited all my neighbors. The new board members came, along with many families who had previously used the cut-through. We laughed, shared food, and enjoyed the space that was now clearly understood to be private property. During the gathering, a neighbor asked if I would consider working with the HOA to establish a proper path along the edge of my property, with appropriate legal easements and compensation for the land use. I'd be open to discussing it, I replied, as long as it's done properly, with respect for everyone's rights and fair compensation. The interim president smiled. That's how it should have been handled from the beginning. As my guests left that evening, walking around my yard rather than through it, I sat on my newly built deck and reflected on the past 6 months. Standing up for my property rights hadn't made me the neighborhood villain. It had exposed real problems in the HOA and ultimately led to positive changes for everyone. Sometimes teaching someone a lesson isn't about revenge. It's about establishing boundaries and demanding respect. My yard was my sanctuary now, and I'd earned every square foot of it. The following spring, we worked out a proper easement agreement for a narrow public path along the very edge of my property, for which the HOA paid me fair market value and covered the cost of installing an attractive walkway with proper drainage and lighting. The agreement included specific maintenance requirements and liability coverage. My vegetable garden doubled in size now that it wasn't being trampled, and I shared the abundant harvest with neighbors, including the family that purchased the former president's house after he quietly moved away over the winter. The moral of the story? Know your rights, document everything, and don't let anyone, even an HOA president, convince you that standing up for yourself makes you a bad neighbor. Sometimes, it makes you exactly the neighbor a community needs. The next one is entitled People Story. So, my boyfriend apparently watches a lot of Game of Thrones because my brother and I are apparently Cersei and Jaime Lannister. I see my brother once or twice per month. When we see each other, we may have lunch, catch a movie, take a walk, or just kick back at his or my apartment and watch movies, play video games, or just have some beer and catch up. I see my boyfriend 3 to 4 times per week at least. On a good month we see each other probably more than 20-30 days. We have been together for 14 months. My boyfriend has met my brother several times. At first I thought they were cool and my brother honestly got that vibe as well. Beyond hanging out a few times initially, my boyfriend never really hung out with my brother when he was in town despite me asking as well as my brother inviting him along. However, recently he brought it up to me that he was not comfortable with us hanging out so much alone and it made him feel weird. He has asked me to not be alone with my brother when we do hang out, and if that's not possible and it will be just us, then he doesn't like that idea. Again, I reiterate, my boyfriend clearly watches too much Game of Thrones because he seems to have some assumption there is some sort of weird incest going on or something. My brother and I have always been close and had each other's backs, that's it. We live our own lives but we love each other and make an effort to maintain a good relationship, especially as our own lives begin to move off in separate directions, despite only living a few hours apart. I have no idea what it is/why he would want me to do this. He has not given a reason beyond "I don't feel comfortable with you hanging out with that guy." There is a photo on Instagram of the two of us on a hike along with my brother's friend. I damaged my ankle a couple months back on that hike and my brother carried me on his back for the rest of the way. His friend took photos because it simply looked funny, but my BF pretty much dislikes those and says it's really weird that you all are 20-something and are so close. For duck's sake, he is my brother and I was injured. Yes, I am angry at my boyfriend. 1. Because he's asked me to stop hanging out alone with my brother, and 2. I do not appreciate the incestuous implications. Reddit, what do you think of this situation and what do you think I should do? Update: so this past Friday I had a talk with my SO about his feelings regarding my relationship with my twin. At first it was the same, I just feel uncomfortable etc. But after pushing for a very frustrating 2 hours he ends up talking about how in the home he grew up, it was very reserved, affection was sparing / the equivalent of getting a present for doing well on exams etc. It was used as a reward. He admits that as a result he sees siblings who are close, especially as close as my brother and I, as being inappropriate, and it makes him uncomfortable. He says he's sorry for this and he'll try to change. Anyway, fast forward to Saturday evening, my brother and a few of our old friends are in the area, so they invite me, my so, and a couple of our friends out. We end up hitting this Latin bar / restaurant with about 3 couples, 2 single girls and 3 single guys. My brother and I and another 2, one of the single guys and one of the single gals who we met Latin dancing a few years back, decide we'll dance since there's music playing and a few other people dancing. It's no professional Dancing with the Stars kind of stuff, by the way. These are all people who've been drinking and just having a merry time, and those who aren't dancing are watching and having fun as well. So my brother and I dance for a bit. We stumble here and there due to some liquor a couple times. It looks sexy is the word, I suppose, but nothing inappropriate. If any one of you has done Latin dancing, you know there's just something sensual and free about those dances in general, whether you're with a partner or just doing a little something by yourself, though generally you're with a partner. Anyway, I dance with a few people including my other female friends and their boyfriends who don't really know how, but we all have a blast with me trying and failing to teach their drunk asses how to cha-cha and salsa. I also pulled my boyfriend for a dance, but he remained planted by the bar area, drinking and generally being stony-faced. We get back to his place. I'm in the mood to fool around. He is angry and starts yelling about how we talked yesterday and he thought this ducking crap, exact words, was over. He is quite pissed and starts ranting about if you want to duck your brother so bad, go ahead, and is basically telling me that he knows I love my brother and I always ducking put that a hole, exact words first, and that he would never do something like that with his sister in front of me or other people, dancing. At a point he shoved me away from him really hard when I tried to put my hands on him and calm him down. I got ducking pissed off. I go to leave, he grabs me and is yelling. At a point I start crying and he seems to snap out of it and gets this shocked look and starts saying I'm sorry and trying to hug me etc. etc. He's apologizing profusely, but now I storm out. Naturally I go back to my place and I call, yes, my twin brother as well as one of my friends, a girl, and the 3 of us proceed to get drunk together. Woke up on my bed next to my friend and my brother snoozing on my couch on Sunday. Boyfriend came over to try and explain / apologize. I told him I didn't want to see him. He pushes into my apartment. Brother gets in his face and tells him to duck off and not to come near me again. While his other friend who came over along with his girlfriend, at this point it's me, my best female friend, my brother, brother's friend, brother's friends, girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, and that the only reason he's not getting his ass beat is because I asked them not to do so. I tell him it's done and not to contact me / come near me anymore. Also, part of me has to admit I danced with my brother simply to get a rise out of my boyfriend due to how much crap he'd been giving me over it. Did not know he would lose it like that. It is what it is. The next one is entitled People Story. 6 weeks ago my wife, 36, and I, 38, moved across the country with our son, 5, to live in my late grandma's old house that we inherited. We're from Seattle and moved to a town in Texas, and honestly my wife and I ducking hate living here, but it's financially better for us for the time being. Plus honestly I'm attached to my grandma's house. I have a lot of tattoos, long hair, just a general look that really isn't common here but was totally normal in Seattle. I've gotten a lot of looks and some crap from people here, which I don't really give a duck about, but suffice it to say my appearance doesn't fit in. So far my wife had been the one picking our son up and dropping him off at school / daycare because my work schedule was all ducked up. But I've settled into the same hours she works, so now we're picking our son up and dropping him off together. I met our son's teacher, Tittle, late 20s, earlier today, and I could just tell she was uncomfortable with my appearance from the jump. My wife and I talked to her for a bit about how our son was adjusting to the new school. After talking about that for a bit, his teacher asked me to cover up my tattoos, which would basically require covering up all of my skin below the neck, when I come pick him up and drop him off because it was off-putting and apparently tattoos are against the school dress code. I said no. I was clothed, tank top and shorts, and I'm not a student, so I said I wasn't under their dress code. Besides, none of my tattoos that are visible when I'm clothed to any degree can be considered offensive unless you find the very idea of tattoos offensive. She insisted, which irritated me and my wife, and basically we just told her that I wasn't going to change how I dress and wasn't going to stop picking up my kid, so she and anyone else who had a problem would have to just deal with it. My wife and I think this is totally ducking ridiculous, but my mom, whom I called earlier today, said I should just go with it and that I'm being a pain in the ass. Edit. My wife and I have decided to call the principal of the school on Monday and set up a meeting to see if this policy even actually exists or if you guys are right and it's just the teacher either making crap up or applying teacher/student/parent volunteer rules. We'll keep an eye on how our son is treated by the teacher and his classmates too. My wife and I called the front office of our son's school this morning and were able to actually meet with the principal and one of the vice principals right before school let out. So we gotta leave work and pick our son up early too, which was really nice. Turns out those of you who said this was probably the teacher overstepping and not an actual rule were totally right. Apparently it is against dress code for both the students and teachers to have tattoos, temporary or otherwise, but as long as you're decent a parent can show up dressed as they like. The meeting went about as well as it could have gone. The principal was pretty avoidant of saying the teacher did anything wrong, per se, and did try to pass it off as the result of his teacher's inexperience, but she did say that the teacher's actions weren't right, so I guess that's something. My wife and I also asked if we could move our son to the other class if he seems unhappy for any reason or if we think the teacher is treating him unfairly, and the principal agreed, so that's also good. I also just wanted to address some of the things that came up multiple times in comments on the original post Bonon. Like I said a couple times in the comments, we live in a fairly small town. My wife and I actually work in a different and somewhat bigger town than the one we live in, so I didn't give my exact location, plus I'm not really familiar with the regions of Texas. Basically, I'm pretty sure Dallas is the closest big city to us, but even Dallas isn't exactly close. I can't speak to how popular my look is in the cities, except Houston. My wife lived there for a year as a teenager and said tattoos were fairly common, but it's definitely not common here. I've seen a couple guys with like 1 or 2 tattoos, but none in color, like mine, and none with nearly as many as I have, and none actually in the town we live in, either. Not totally relevant, but they've all got full beards too, and I like to keep my face clean shaven. Like I said in my original post, we moved here for a mix of financial and sentimental reasons. Basically, even before we got here, the plan was to not stay for any longer than 3 years, but honestly, we might be moving before the end of this one because my wife and I really despise it here and our son seems so let down every weekend. I didn't really want to get into it, but I had to get surgery to treat my IBD about a year and a half ago, which obviously was costly. Plus we wanted to save a good amount of money for our son while he's young so he won't need as much in student loans if he eventually goes to college, and we basically weren't able to afford to live the way we wanted in Seattle anymore. On top of that, to be honest, I am very attached to my grandma's house and I just wasn't able to part with it immediately when she died. My wife and my grandma are the only people I've really felt at home with, if that makes any sense. And my grandma's death was unexpected so I really wasn't prepared to just get rid of her house. My wife, the absolute ducking angel that she is, suggested that we move here for a little while, just until we know where to settle until our son leaves for college. Maybe we'll get enough when we sell the house that it can be Seattle. Maybe we won't. My wife and son mean more to me than anything and everyone else in the world combined, so I don't want them to live in a place they hate. Some of you think that I shouldn't have said anything and should have just complied for fear of my son being treated poorly, but I think that's a super crappy precedent to set and model for our son and I think it probably wouldn't affect anyone's behavior anyway. Obviously whether people accept my tats or not doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but I don't want my son to think that it is okay for other people to tell him to look a certain way because that's what they want/are comfortable with, nor do I want him to think it's okay to treat others that way. I don't think teaching him to conform is ever a good thing. I also don't think trying to conform actually makes people accept you anymore, but that's just me. Plus he's 5 and he's already brought cupcakes to school, so I should hope the other 5-year-olds aren't going to have a problem for. I thought I was clear in the original post that all of my tattoos that are visible when I'm clothed are not offensive, but apparently I wasn't. I'm not going to show them, obviously, but basically most of the visible ones are of animals, extant and extinct, with some book and movie references too. Even the evolution tattoo I have is mostly not visible with a tank on. I do have some gory and some X-rated tattoos that would be inappropriate for kids to see, but those are all not visible when I'm clothed. I'd need to be in nothing but a Speedo or super short shorts, which I don't wear, for even some of them to be visible and I'd need to be naked for all of them to be visible, so suffice it to say there wasn't anything visible that a reasonable person would find offensive. A lot of you have weird opinions about whether men should wear tank tops at all or not. I think that's just a weird thing to comment on. Honestly. I mean who cares? I mean I'm not going to comment on whether men should hold their big belt buckle in public or not. I wasn't wearing a wife beater either, it was a tank top. As long as it feels like summer to me, I'm gonna wear one. Plus my wife really loves them, so I'm definitely not going to just excise them from my wardrobe. The meeting with our son's teacher was impromptu anyway. If it had been an actual parent-teacher conference, sure, I probably would have gone with a t-shirt, but we just thought it'd be a quick get out, pick up our son, and go occasion. Sorry if that was too long. Thanks for the advice, everyone. It was much appreciated. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.